The chapel door creaked open in the fading light of a January evening in 1878, and Zachary Sawyer stopped cold when he saw the woman kneeling alone at the altar, her voice barely a whisper as she poured her heart out to God. He had ridden down from the mountains surrounding San Bernardino, California, after 3 months of trapping in the wilderness, looking for nothing more than a quiet place to sit and think before heading to the saloon. The small wooden chapel at the edge of town had always been his refuge when civilization felt too loud and too close. But he had not expected to find her there, and something in the desperate quality of her prayer made him pause instead of leaving. Zachary was a man built by the mountains themselves, standing well over 6 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown elk. His dark hair fell past his collar, streaked with sun and wind, and his hands were calloused from years of hard living in the high country. Muscles corded his arms and chest from hauling traps and pelts, from splitting wood and surviving winters that would have killed softer men. His beard was thick and dark, framing a face weathered by sun and snow, but his eyes held a gentleness that contradicted his fierce appearance. He moved silently to the back pew, his buckskin clothing making barely a sound as he lowered himself onto the rough wooden bench. The woman had not heard him enter. She remained on her knees before the simple wooden cross that adorned the altar, her head bowed so low her forehead nearly touched her clasped hands. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Please, Lord, I do not know what else to do. Father is gone, and Mother needs medicine I cannot afford. The boarding house barely brings in enough to feed us, and now Mrs. Patterson says she will take it for the debts Father left behind. I have tried to be strong, tried to manage everything on my own, but I am so tired. I am so very tired." Zachary felt something twist in his chest. He knew loss and hardship intimately. The mountains had taught him that survival was never guaranteed, that every day was a gift earned through strength and determination. But there was something about hearing this woman's raw vulnerability that pierced through the armor he had built around his heart. "I know I should not complain," she continued, her voice breaking. "I know others have suffered more, but I am afraid. I am afraid of failing Mother, of losing our home, of not being enough. Please, if you can hear me, please show me what to do." The last words dissolved into quiet weeping, and Zachary sat motionless, feeling like an intruder on something sacred. He could have left then, could have slipped back out the door and gone about his business. But something kept him rooted to that pew, waiting with a patience he had learned from watching mountain lions stalk their prey and eagles circle thermal currents. The woman's tears gradually subsided. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and took several deep breaths, composing herself with visible effort. When she finally lifted her head and rose from her knees, Zachary could see her profile in the golden light streaming through the chapel's single window. She was lovely in a way that had nothing to do with ornament or artifice. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun, wisps escaping to frame a face marked by exhaustion, but still holding traces of youth and vitality. She wore a plain gray dress that had been mended several times, and her movements carried the careful precision of someone who had learned to husband every ounce of energy. When she turned to leave, she finally saw him sitting in the shadows at the back of the chapel. She gasped, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes wide with shock and perhaps fear. "I apologize for startling you," Zachary said quickly, his deep voice gentle despite its roughness. "I came in while you were praying. I did not want to interrupt, so I waited." The woman's chest rose and fell rapidly as she tried to steady herself. Color flooded her cheeks as she realized he must have heard everything. "How long have you been sitting there?" "Since the beginning," he admitted, rising to his feet. Even in the dim light, he could see her mortification. "I am sorry. I should have announced myself or left, but your words seemed too important to interrupt." She pressed her lips together, clearly fighting between embarrassment and something else, perhaps anger. "It is not proper to eavesdrop on someone's prayers." "No, it is not," he agreed. "And I apologize for that too, but I am glad I heard." "Glad?" Her voice rose slightly. "You are glad to have witnessed my humiliation, my weakness." Zachary shook his head slowly, taking a single step forward but maintaining a respectful distance. "There is no weakness in prayer, miss. There is no weakness in being honest with God about your struggles. That takes more courage than most people ever show." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her truly taking him in for the first time. Her gaze traveled from his worn boots up his buckskin pants and leather vest, lingering on the breadth of his shoulders before finally settling on his face. He watched recognition dawn in her eyes as she placed him in some mental category: mountain man, trapper, someone who lived outside the boundaries of polite society. "Who are you?" she asked. "Zachary Sawyer. Most folks who know me just call me Sawyer. I trap in the San Bernardino Mountains and come down to town a few times a year to sell pelts and resupply." "I see." Her posture remained rigid, defensive. "Well, Mr. Sawyer, I appreciate your patience in waiting for me to finish my prayers, but I must be getting home now. My mother will be worried." She moved to walk past him, but Zachary spoke again, his words stopping her. "You mentioned debts and losing your boarding house." Her spine stiffened. "That is none of your concern." "Maybe not," he acknowledged, "but I know something about being alone and afraid. I know what it is like to feel like the world is pressing down on you with no relief in sight. And I know what it is like to need help but be too proud to ask for it." She turned back to face him, and in the fading light, he could see tears threatening again in her eyes. "Even if I wanted help, even if I were willing to set aside my pride, what could you possibly do? You are a stranger. You know nothing about me or my situation." "True enough," Zachary said, "but I have money from my furs. Been saving it for years with nothing particular to spend it on. And I have time before I head back up the mountain. Sometimes that is all help requires: money and time." "I cannot accept charity from a stranger," she said firmly, but he could hear the waver in her voice, the desperate hope fighting against her pride. "It does not have to be charity," he said. "What if we made it an honest arrangement? You said you run a boarding house. I need a place to stay for the next few weeks while I conduct my business in town. I will pay you a fair rate for room and board. That money could help with your debts, could it not?" She studied him with obvious suspicion. "Boarding houses do not typically accommodate men of your sort. My sort: mountain men, trappers, men who smell of buckskin and gunpowder and wilderness." A smile tugged at the corner of Zachary's mouth. "Fair enough. But I bathe regularly, I do not drink to excess, and I have no intention of causing trouble. I just need a bed and some decent meals." "Can you provide that?" She hesitated, and he could see the internal battle raging across her expressive face. Need warred with propriety, desperation with dignity. Finally, she drew in a deep breath and gave a single sharp nod. "My name is Natalie Vance. The boarding house is on 3rd Street, the white building with green shutters. Dinner is at 6 o'clock sharp. If you are going to stay, you will follow my rules and conduct yourself as a gentleman at all times." "I would expect nothing less," Zachary said solemnly, "and I charge $2 a week for room and board." "I will give you 4, her eyes flashed. "I said 2. I will not accept more than the standard rate." "Then consider the extra payment for putting up with a man who smells of buckskin and gunpowder and wilderness," he said, and this time he did smile. Despite herself, Natalie's lips twitched. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. "Very well. $4 a week, but you will still follow my rules." "Yes, madam." She nodded once more and then swept past him toward the door. As she reached it, she paused and looked back. "Thank you, Mr. Sawyer, for waiting until I finished, for listening, for offering help." "Zachary," he said. "Or Sawyer. Either one." "Zachary," she repeated softly. Then she was gone, the door closing behind her with a gentle click. Zachary stood alone in the chapel as darkness filled the corners and the last light faded from the window. He had come to town expecting nothing more than business transactions, and perhaps a few nights of cards and whiskey. Instead, he had found a woman whose desperate prayer had touched something in him he thought had died years ago. He did not know if it was divine providence or simple chance that had led him to that chapel at that precise moment. But as he walked out into the cold January night, he felt the strange certainty that his life had just changed direction in a way he could not yet comprehend. The boarding house was easy to find. It stood on 3rd Street just as Natalie had said, a 2-story white building with green shutters that had once been well maintained but now showed signs of neglect. Paint peeled from the window frames, and one of the shutters hung slightly crooked. The front porch sagged a bit on one side, and the gate in the small fence squeaked loudly when Zachary pushed it open. He knocked on the front door, his saddlebags slung over one massive shoulder. Through the lace-curtained window beside the door, he could see lamplight and movement. After a moment, Natalie opened the door. She had changed from her gray dress into one of faded blue that was no less worn but somehow suited her better. Her hair remained in its practical bun, but she had tidied the loose strands. "Mr. Sawyer," she said formally, "please come in." The interior of the boarding house was clean but sparse. The furniture was old but well maintained, and everything had the careful arrangement of someone who took pride in their home, despite having little means to improve it. The smell of something cooking wafted from the back of the house, making Zachary's stomach growl. He had eaten nothing but dried venison and hardtack for weeks. "We have 5 rooms for boarders," Natalie explained as she led him up the narrow staircase. "Currently, you will be the only guest. Business has been slow since Father passed." Her voice remained steady, but Zachary heard the pain underneath. "When did you lose him?" "6 months ago. He was thrown from a horse and hit his head. He never woke up." She stopped at a door on the 2nd floor and opened it. "This will be your room. It has a bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. The necessary is out back. I heat water for baths on Saturday evenings. If you want one before then, you will need to arrange it yourself." "Saturday evening baths sound fine," Zachary said, stepping into the small room. It was plain but comfortable, with a window that looked out over the street. The bed appeared sturdy enough to hold his considerable weight, which was not always a guarantee in boarding houses. "This will do nicely. Dinner will be ready in half an hour," Natalie said. "I will ring the bell when it is time." She turned to leave, but Zachary spoke again. "Miss Vance, you mentioned your mother needs medicine. What ails her?" Natalie's shoulders tensed. "Her lungs are weak. The doctor says the dry air here is better for her than the humidity back east where we came from, but she still has spells where she cannot catch her breath. There is a tonic that helps, but it costs $3 a bottle, and she needs a new bottle every 2 weeks. "What is the name of the doctor?" "Dr. Morrison. His office is on Main Street." She looked at him warily. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Zachary said mildly. "I have dealt with lung ailments before. Mountain winters are hard on the chest." She nodded slowly, still watching him with that mixture of hope and suspicion. "I will ring the bell soon." After she left, Zachary set down his saddlebags and moved to the window. From this vantage point, he could see a good portion of San Bernardino, the dusty streets, the scattered buildings, the mountains rising dark against the star-filled sky. The town had grown since his last visit 2 years ago. More buildings, more people, more of the civilization that always made him feel slightly trapped. But now there was also Natalie, with her desperate prayers and her fierce pride and her heavy burdens. He thought about her kneeling in that chapel, about the way her voice had broken when she spoke of being tired and afraid. He knew that feeling too well. After his own wife and infant daughter had died of fever 5 years ago, he had fled to the mountains to escape the crushing weight of grief and failure. The wilderness had saved him, had given him a purpose and a reason to keep living. But it had also isolated him, had kept him safe from the risk of caring too deeply about anything again. Now here he was, already caring about a woman he had just met, already wanting to ease her burdens and see her smile without shadows in her eyes. The dinner bell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. He washed his face and hands in the basin on the washstand, ran his fingers through his long hair to smooth it down, and headed downstairs. The dining room held a long table with 8 chairs. Only 2 places had been set, one at the head of the table and one to its right. Natalie emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of roasted chicken, potatoes, and carrots. The smell made Zachary's mouth water. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the head of the table. "Where is your mother?" Zachary asked as he settled into the chair, which creaked under his weight but held. "She eats in her room," Natalie said, her voice carefully neutral. "She is not strong enough to manage the stairs multiple times a day, so I bring her meals to her." "I see. And you usually eat alone." "I am accustomed to it." She sat down and folded her hands. "Would you like to say grace?" Zachary bowed his head. "Lord, we thank you for this food and for the hands that prepared it. We ask your blessing on this house and all who dwell in it. Amen." "Amen," Natalie echoed softly. They began to eat, and Zachary had to suppress a groan of pleasure at the first bite. The chicken was perfectly seasoned, the vegetables tender, everything vastly superior to his own rough camp cooking. "This is excellent," he said sincerely. "Thank you." A faint flush of pleasure colored her cheeks. "My mother taught me to cook. She said it was the most important skill a woman could have. She was right about that. A person can endure almost anything if they are well fed." They ate in silence for a few minutes before Natalie spoke again. "May I ask you something, Mr. Sawyer?" "Zachary," he corrected gently. "And yes. Why did you really offer to stay here? You could afford the hotel, I am sure. It would be more comfortable, more appropriate for a man of your means." Zachary set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Because when I sat in that chapel and heard you praying, I recognized something in your voice. I recognized the sound of someone who has been strong for too long, who has carried burdens that should have been shared, who has reached the end of their rope and is desperately hoping it does not break. I recognized it because I have been there myself. And so you decided to help a stranger out of the kindness of your heart." Her tone was skeptical, but not hostile. "Partly," he admitted, "but also because I think maybe God intended for me to walk into that chapel at that exact moment. I am not usually a man who looks for divine signs, Miss Vance. I believe in hard work and self-reliance and making your own way in the world. But sometimes, something happens that feels bigger than coincidence. This felt like that." Natalie stared at him for a long moment, her food forgotten. "I prayed for help," she said quietly, "for a sign, for direction, for anything, and then I turned around and you were there. Yes. You think it means something? I think it means I should stay and help you however I can for as long as I am able," Zachary said. "Beyond that I cannot say. But I learned in the mountains that you do not question good fortune. You accept it and make the most of it." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and when Zachary offered to help clear the dishes, Natalie looked surprised but did not refuse. They worked together in the small kitchen, washing and drying plates, and Zachary found himself enjoying the simple domestic rhythm of it. "Tell me about the debts," he said as he dried a plate. "How much do you owe and to whom?" Natalie's hands stilled in the wash water. "Why?" "Because debt is a specific problem with specific solutions. And I find that most problems become less overwhelming once you break them down into their component parts." She was quiet for a long moment, her hands moving again, scrubbing a pot with more force than necessary. Finally, she spoke. "My father borrowed $300 from Mrs. Patterson 2 years ago. He was going to use it to make improvements to the boarding house to attract more guests, but he died before he could repay it. Mrs. Patterson has been patient, but she says if I cannot pay her within the next month, she will claim the boarding house in settlement of the debt." $300, Zachary repeated. "And you have how much saved?" $47. Her voice was tight with shame. "I know it is not nearly enough. I have been trying to save every penny, but there is always something else. Medicine for mother, repairs to the house, food, coal for heat. The money disappears as fast as I can earn it. So you need $253 in the next month." "Yes." She let out a bitter laugh. "An impossible amount. That is why I was praying. I do not know what else to do. When we lose the boarding house, I do not know where mother and I will go or how we will survive." Zachary set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. "What if I paid off the debt?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What? No, absolutely not. Why not? I have the money and you need it." "Because it would be charity, and I will not accept charity." Her voice rose with each word. "I may be desperate, Mr. Sawyer, but I still have my pride. I will not become a kept woman, beholden to a stranger who expects who knows what in return." "I would expect nothing in return," Zachary said firmly. "And it would not be charity. It would be a loan. You could pay me back whenever you are able with no interest." "A loan with no interest is still charity in disguise." She dried her hands roughly on her apron. "I appreciate the offer, truly I do, but I cannot accept." "Then what will you do?" "I do not know." The words burst from her, raw and desperate. "I do not know, and the not knowing is what terrifies me most. But whatever I do, it will be my choice, my decision. I will not trade one debt for another, especially not to a man I just met." Zachary could see the fierce pride blazing in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. He recognized that look. He had worn it himself many times. It was the look of someone who had been pushed to their limit and refused to break, even when breaking might be easier. "All right," he said softly. "No loan, but my offer to stay and pay for room and board stands." "That is not charity, that is business. $4 a week for a clean room and good meals." "Agreed." She searched his face, looking for hidden motives or mockery. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded. "Agreed." "Good. Now, is there anything that needs fixing around here?" "I am handy with tools and I have time. I could do some repairs in exchange for my room if that would make you feel better about the arrangement." "I thought you said it was not charity." "It is not. But a boarding house should be well maintained if you want to attract more guests. Consider it an investment in your business." Despite her obvious frustration and exhaustion, Natalie almost smiled. "You are very persistent, Mr. Sawyer." "Zachary. And yes, I am. The mountains taught me that persistence is often the difference between life and death. Now, what needs fixing?" She sighed, but he could see her resistance crumbling. "The porch step is loose. One of the shutters is crooked. The back fence has several broken boards. The stove door does not close properly, which wastes heat and coal." That is enough to start with," Zachary interrupted, holding up a hand. "I will begin tomorrow. For tonight, I think we both could use some rest." Natalie nodded, suddenly looking bone-weary. The brief flash of spirit had drained from her, leaving behind the exhaustion he had heard in her prayer. "Yes, rest sounds good. There are extra blankets in the chest at the foot of your bed if you need them. The nights get cold here. Thank you. Good night, Miss Vance." "Good night, Zachary." He watched her climb the stairs slowly, her hand gripping the railing as if she needed its support. When she disappeared down the hallway toward what he assumed was her mother's room, he turned and made his own way upstairs. His room was cold, so he pulled an extra blanket from the chest and spread it over the bed. Then he sat on the edge of the mattress, testing its give. It was firmer than he expected, which suited him fine. Too soft and he would wake up with a backache. Through the thin walls, he could hear the murmur of voices. Natalie speaking to her mother, the words indistinct but the tone gentle and soothing. The mother's response was fainter, punctuated by a wet cough that made Zachary wince. Lung ailments were dangerous, especially for older people. He had seen plenty of trappers succumb to pneumonia or consumption in the mountains. He thought about Natalie's situation, turning it over in his mind like a trapper examining a pelt for flaws. $300 was not an insurmountable sum, but for a woman running a failing boarding house with no other source of income, it might as well be $3,000. The room and board payments would help, but not enough. Even at $4 a week, it would take more than a year to pay off the debt, and she did not have a year. She had a month. There had to be another way, some solution that would allow her to keep her pride while also saving her home. He just needed to think of it. But tonight, his mind was too tired from the long ride down from the mountains. Tomorrow, he would start working on repairs and getting a better sense of the boarding house's situation. Tomorrow, he would visit Dr. Morrison and ask about the mother's condition. Tomorrow, he would begin figuring out how to help Natalie without trampling her fierce independence. For now, he needed rest. He stretched out on the bed, still fully clothed except for his boots, and pulled the blankets up to his chin. The mattress was indeed firm but not uncomfortable. Through the window, he could see stars brilliant against the black sky, the same stars he watched from his cabin in the mountains. But something felt different tonight. The usual restless energy that plagued him in town was absent. Instead, he felt a strange sense of purpose, of rightness. As if this was exactly where he was supposed to be. He thought of Natalie's face in the chapel, the way the golden light had caught in her hair and painted her skin in warm tones. He thought of her voice breaking as she prayed, of her pride when she refused his loan, of the way she had almost smiled when he persisted about the repairs. Zachary had not thought about a woman in that way, with interest and attraction and something deeper than physical desire since his wife died. The grief had been too fresh, the guilt too crushing. He had loved Sarah with everything in him, and when she and their baby daughter had died, he had wanted to die too. Only the brutal demands of survival in the wilderness had kept him going, had forced him to put one foot in front of the other until eventually, the sharp edge of grief had dulled to a chronic ache. Now, lying in this narrow bed in this worn boarding house, he felt that ache shift and change into something new. Not forgetting Sarah, he would never forget her, but perhaps making room for something else. Someone else. It was too soon to call it love. He barely knew Natalie. But there was something there, some spark of recognition and connection that felt significant. Like the first green shoots pushing through snow in spring, tentative but persistent, reaching toward the sun. He fell asleep with that thought, with the sound of Natalie's footsteps in the hallway and the whisper of her door closing, with the stars watching through the window and the mountains standing guard in the distance. Morning came early, announced by roosters crowing and the rattle of wagon wheels on the street outside. Zachary woke instantly, a habit from years of sleeping light in the wilderness where any sound could mean danger. He lay still for a moment, orienting himself, remembering where he was and why. The boarding house. Natalie. The repairs he had promised to make. He rose and dressed quickly, splashing water from the basin on his face to wake himself fully. His reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed a man who looked every bit as rough as Natalie had implied the night before. His beard needed trimming, his hair was wild from sleep, and his skin bore the permanent tan of someone who lived outdoors. But his eyes were clear and his body was strong, and that would have to be enough. Downstairs, he found Natalie already in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. She wore the same faded blue dress from the night before, covered by a white apron dusted with flour. Her hair was neatly pinned, and though her face showed signs of fatigue, her movements were brisk and capable. "Good morning," Zachary said from the doorway. She looked up, startled. "Oh, good morning. I did not expect you to be awake so early. Mountain habit. The sun rises and so do I." "Can I help with anything?" "No, thank you. Breakfast will be ready in about 20 minutes. There is coffee in the pot if you want some." Zachary poured himself a cup of the strong black coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her work. Her hands moved with the unconscious grace of long practice, folding and pressing the dough in a rhythm that was almost meditative. "Did you sleep well?" she asked without looking up. "Well enough. And you?" "Well enough," she echoed, but the shadows under her eyes suggested otherwise. "How is your mother this morning?" "The same." Natalie's hands stilled for a moment before resuming their work. "She has good days and bad days. Today is neither, which I suppose is a blessing." "May I meet her?" Natalie looked up sharply. "Why?" "Because I am staying in her house and eating her food. Seems only polite to introduce myself." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "After breakfast. She is usually stronger in the mornings." They ate together again, eggs and bacon and fresh bread still warm from the oven. Zachary found himself studying Natalie when she was not looking, noticing small things. The way she cut her food into precise pieces. The way she held her coffee cup with both hands, as if drawing warmth from it. The way her gaze would sometimes drift to the window, looking out at something only she could see. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She blinked and focused on him. "I was thinking that I need to go to the bank today, to speak with them about an extension on the loan. It probably will not work, but I have to try." "Would you like me to come with you?" "Why would you do that?" "Because sometimes it is easier to negotiate when you are not alone. I will not speak unless you want me to, but my presence might make the banker take you more seriously." Natalie set down her fork, her expression troubled. "You mean because you are a man?" "Yes," Zachary said bluntly. "It is not fair or right, but it is true. Bankers respect men more than women, especially when it comes to money matters." "I hate that you are correct," she sighed. "Very well. If you are willing, I would appreciate the company." After breakfast, Natalie led Zachary upstairs to the room at the far end of the hall. She knocked softly before opening the door. "Mother, I have brought someone to meet you." The room was smaller than Zachary's, dominated by a large bed piled high with quilts. In the bed lay a woman who must have been beautiful in her youth and remained handsome despite her obvious illness. She had Natalie's bone structure and the same expressive eyes, though hers were faded with age and pain. Her gray hair lay in a long braid over one shoulder. "Mother, this is Mr. Zachary Sawyer. He will be staying with us for a while. Zachary, this is my mother, Margaret Vance." Zachary moved forward and took the woman's frail hand gently in his massive one. "It is an honor to meet you, Mrs. Vance. Your daughter has been most kind in taking me in." Margaret's eyes sharpened as she studied him. When she spoke, Her voice was weak but clear. "You are a mountain man." "Yes, madam. I can see it in the way you move, like you are always ready to run or fight." She coughed, a wet rattling sound that made Natalie reach for a glass of water on the bedside table. After she drank, Margaret continued, "What brings you down from your mountains, Mr. Sawyer?" "Business, mostly. Selling furs, buying supplies, but I am glad I came when I did. Your daughter runs a fine establishment and I am grateful for the hospitality." "Hum." Margaret's keen eyes moved between Zachary and Natalie. "Natalie tells me you offered to make repairs." "Yes, madam. There are a few things that need fixing and I have the time and the skills." "Why would you do that? What do you want in return?" "Mother." Natalie's voice was sharp with embarrassment, but Zachary smiled. He appreciated directness. "Nothing beyond a fair exchange of labor for lodging, Mrs. Vance. Your daughter is providing me with good food and a comfortable room. In return, I can provide some maintenance that will help the boarding house attract more guests. It is simply good business." Margaret continued to study him with those sharp eyes. Finally, she nodded. "You may make your repairs, Mr. Sawyer, but know that I will be watching. My daughter has been hurt enough by men who made promises they did not keep. If you prove to be another such man, mountain or not, I will find a way to make you regret it." "Mother," Natalie looked mortified. But Zachary's smile widened. "I would expect nothing less, Mrs. Vance. You are a wise woman to protect your daughter so fiercely. I give you my word that I mean you both no harm and intend to keep whatever promises I make." Margaret nodded again, satisfied. "Good. Now leave me. All this talking has tired me out." Natalie kissed her mother's forehead and ushered Zachary out of the room. In the hallway, she pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. "I am so sorry. She is usually not so blunt." "Do not apologize. I like her. She reminds me of my own mother, God rest her soul." Strong women who speak their minds are to be treasured, not silenced. Natalie looked at him with something like wonder. "Most men do not feel that way." "Then most men are fools." He gestured toward the stairs. "Shall we go speak with your banker?" The bank was a sturdy brick building on Main Street, its presence meant to convey stability and prosperity. Inside, the air smelled of paper and ink and the faint mustiness of stored money. A clerk behind a tall desk looked up as they entered, his eyes flickering over Zachary's buckskins with obvious disdain before settling more favorably on Natalie. "Miss Vance, how may I help you today?" "I need to speak with Mr. Peterson, please." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it is urgent," the clerk sniffed. "Mr. Peterson is very busy. Perhaps you could return later." Zachary stepped forward, and though he said nothing, his sheer size and presence made the clerk's eyes widen. "The lady said it was urgent," Zachary said quietly. Yes, of course." "Let me see if Mr. Peterson is available." The clerk scurried away, nearly tripping over his own feet. Natalie looked up at Zachary with barely suppressed amusement. "You did not have to intimidate him." "I did not do anything except stand here. You loomed." "If you say so." The clerk returned, slightly out of breath. "Mr. Peterson will see you now. Please follow me." They were led to an office paneled in dark wood and furnished with expensive furniture meant to impress. Behind the massive desk sat a man in his 50s, well-fed and prosperously dressed. He rose when Natalie entered but barely glanced at Zachary. "Miss Vance, what a pleasant surprise. Please sit down." His tone was oily, too friendly. Zachary immediately distrusted him. Natalie sat in one of the chairs facing the desk. Zachary remained standing behind her, a silent presence. "Mr. Peterson, I have come to discuss the loan my father took out 2 years ago. I understand Mrs. Patterson holds the note now, but I was hoping the bank might be willing to negotiate an extension. I need more time to gather the full amount." Peterson leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Miss Vance, we have discussed this before. The bank sold that note to Mrs. Patterson 6 months ago when it became clear you were unable to make regular payments. The matter is now between you and her. We cannot intervene." "But surely there is something." "There is nothing," Peterson interrupted, his false friendliness fading. "The terms were made clear at the time of the loan. Your father understood them, and now the responsibility falls to you. If you cannot pay, Mrs. Patterson has every right to claim the property." "That property is all my mother and I have," Natalie said, and Zachary heard the tremor she was fighting to control. "If we lose it, we will have nothing. No home, no income, nothing. I am asking for mercy, Mr. Peterson. Just a few more months to try to raise the money. Business is not built on mercy, Miss Vance." Peterson's eyes flickered to Zachary and then back to Natalie. "Though perhaps there might be other arrangements we could discuss, if you were interested." The implication in his tone made Zachary's hands curl into fists. Natalie's spine went rigid. "What sort of arrangements?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. Peterson smiled, showing too many teeth. "A woman alone, struggling to make ends meet, it must be very difficult. If you were to have, shall we say, a benefactor, someone who could help with your financial difficulties in exchange for your companionship, that might solve many problems." The silence that followed was thunderous. Zachary felt rage build in his chest, hot and fierce. But before he could speak, Natalie rose to her feet with such dignity that even Peterson looked taken aback. "Mr. Peterson, I came here hoping to find a businessman with some shred of decency. Instead, I find a man willing to exploit a woman's desperation for his own vile purposes. I will not dignify your suggestion with a response beyond this. If you ever approach me with such a proposition again, I will make sure every decent person in San Bernardino knows exactly what kind of man you are." She turned and walked toward the door, her head high. Zachary followed, but not before leaning over Peterson's desk and speaking in a voice that promised violence without explicitly threatening it. "If you ever speak to Miss Vance that way again, you will answer to me. Do you understand?" Peterson had gone pale. He nodded jerkily, and Zachary straightened, satisfied that his message had been received. Outside the bank, Natalie walked quickly down the street, her movements stiff with barely contained emotion. Zachary caught up to her easily with his long strides. "Natalie, wait." She stopped, her back still to him. When she turned, he saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her jaw was set with fury. "You see now," she asked, her voice shaking. "Do you see what happens when a woman is alone and vulnerable? Men like Peterson think they can use our desperation against us, think they can offer degradation and call it help." "Not all men," Zachary said quietly. "And Peterson is a coward who only makes such offers when he thinks he can get away with it. You showed him otherwise." "But he was right about one thing," she continued, the tears finally spilling over. "I am desperate. I do need help, and I have nowhere to turn." Without thinking, Zachary reached out and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against his chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He held her gently, one large hand cradling the back of her head, letting her cry out the fear and frustration and helplessness. They stood like that on the street, and Zachary did not care who saw or what they thought. All that mattered was the woman in his arms who had finally reached her breaking point and needed someone to be strong enough to hold her together. Eventually, her tears subsided. She pulled back, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I am sorry, that was unseemly." "That was human," Zachary corrected, "and there is no shame in it." She looked up at him, and something passed between them in that moment, recognition perhaps. a shared understanding of pain and loss and the desperate need for connection. Her hand came up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. "Because you deserve kindness," he said simply. "Because I know what it is like to feel alone against the world. And because when I saw you praying in that chapel, something in my heart woke up that I thought was dead forever." Her eyes widened. "Zachary, I am not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I am not Peterson. I am not trying to take advantage. I just want you to know that you are not alone anymore. Whatever happens, you have at least one person in your corner who will stand with you." A smile, small but genuine, broke through her tears. "Thank you. That means more than you know." They walked back to the boarding house together, not touching but close enough that their arms occasionally brushed. Zachary found himself hyper-aware of her presence, of the way she moved, of the faint scent of soap and flour that clung to her. Back at the boarding house, Natalie went to check on her mother while Zachary collected tools from his saddlebags and began working on the repairs. The porch step was loose because several nails had worked free over time. He reinforced it with new nails and a brace, testing his weight on it until he was satisfied it would hold. The crooked shutter required more finesse. One of the hinges had bent, throwing the whole thing off balance. He removed the shutter entirely, straightened the hinge using a makeshift anvil and his knife handle as a hammer, then rehung it carefully. It took 3 tries to get it perfectly straight, but he was patient. As he worked, he thought about Natalie's situation. The bank had been a dead end, and Mrs. Patterson clearly had no intention of extending any mercy. That left limited options. They needed to either raise the full amount in the next month, which seemed impossible given the boarding house's current income, or find some way to invalidate or renegotiate the debt itself. Zachary was not a man versed in legal matters, but he had learned over the years that most problems had solutions if you were willing to think creatively enough. There had to be something they were missing, some angle they had not considered. He was pondering this while repairing the back fence when Natalie came out carrying 2 glasses of water. She handed him one, and he drank it gratefully. The January sun was weak, but the physical labor had warmed him. "You have made good progress," she observed, looking at the newly reinforced fence. "It is simple work," he said. "The wood was sound, just needed some new nails and attention. Whoever built this fence originally did good work. My father built it." Her voice was soft. "He was good with his hands, good at building and fixing things. I inherited my mother's practicality but not his craftsmanship. You have other skills that are just as valuable. You can cook, manage a household, care for your mother. Those things require just as much skill as carpentry." She smiled at him, and it reached her eyes this time. "You have a kind way of looking at things, Zachary." They stood together in the winter sunlight, drinking water and not talking, and Zachary felt something settle inside him. This, he thought, this simple shared moment of peace, this was what he had been missing in his solitary life. Not just the company of another person, but the specific company of this woman who challenged him and trusted him, and was beginning to see him as more than just a temporary boarder. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. Zachary would wake early and work on repairs before breakfast. Then he and Natalie would eat together while discussing the day's plans. After breakfast, he would either continue with maintenance work or accompany Natalie on errands around town. She introduced him to the grocer, the doctor, the minister, all the people who made up the fabric of her life in San Bernardino, and everywhere they went, Zachary saw the same pattern. People liked Natalie, respected her, but no one offered to help. The grocer extended credit reluctantly. The doctor provided medicine for her mother but made it clear he expected payment soon. The minister offered prayers but no practical assistance. Everyone was sympathetic, but no one was willing to risk their own resources to save her, except Zachary. He paid for the medicine when he overheard Natalie trying to negotiate with the pharmacist. He purchased supplies from the grocer and had them delivered to the boarding house. He paid double his agreed-upon rent, placing the money on the kitchen table when Natalie was not looking. She noticed, of course. She confronted him one evening after dinner, her hands on her hips and fire in her eyes. "You paid the pharmacist." "Yes. I told you I would handle it, and I chose to handle it for you." "Zachary," she threw up her hands in frustration. "I cannot keep accepting your charity. Do you not understand that every time you pay for something, every time you give me more money than we agreed upon, you make me feel like a failure? Like I am incapable of taking care of myself and my mother." Her words struck him hard because he had not thought of it that way. He had only wanted to help, to ease her burdens. But he could see now how his actions, however well-intentioned, undermined the very independence and dignity she was fighting to maintain. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "That was not my intention. I know." Some of the anger drained from her voice. "I know you mean well, but please, Zachary, let me handle things my own way. If I need your help, I will ask for it. Can you promise me that?" "I promise." He hesitated, then continued. "But Natalie, there is a difference between respecting your independence and watching you struggle when I have the means to help. Can we find some middle ground?" She considered this, her expression thoughtful. "What if we made a proper business arrangement? Not charity, not gifts, but a real partnership. You clearly need something to occupy your time while you are in town. What if you manage the maintenance and repairs for the boarding house in exchange for a share of the profits once we start getting more boarders?" "That seems fair," Zachary said, though they both knew there were no profits to share currently. But he understood what she was offering, a way for him to help that preserved her dignity. "Good. Then we have an agreement." She held out her hand and he shook it, her small hand disappearing in his large one, but he did not let go immediately. Instead, he held her hand gently and looked into her eyes. "Natalie, I want you to know something. Everything I have done because I care about you. Not because I think you are weak or incapable, but because I think you are strong and capable and you deserve to have someone supporting you for a change instead of taking from you." Her breath caught. "Zachary, I am not finished," he said, his voice low and intense. "That first night when I heard you praying, something changed in me. I have been alone for a long time by choice, because I thought being alone was safer than risking caring about someone again. But you made me want to take that risk. You made me want to stay, to build something, to be part of something bigger than just surviving in the mountains. Are you saying," she paused, as if afraid to put words to what she was thinking, "are you saying you have feelings for me?" "Yes." The word was simple, direct, honest. "I am saying that I am falling in love with you, Natalie Vance. And before you tell me it is too soon or that you barely know me, I understand. I am not asking you to feel the same way. I just need you to know where my heart stands." She stared at him, her eyes wide and bright with emotion. Then, slowly, she stepped closer and placed her free hand on his chest, right over his heart like she had that day outside the bank. "You are right," she whispered. "It is too soon and I barely know you, but Zachary, I am falling too. I think I started falling that night in the chapel when I turned around and saw you sitting there, waiting so patiently, respecting my prayer even though you had no obligation to do so. I think I fell a little more every time you fixed something broken, every time you stood beside me instead of speaking for me, every time you looked at me like I was someone precious instead of someone pitiful. You are precious," he said fiercely. "Never doubt that." And then he was kissing her, or she was kissing him, or they were kissing each other. It was impossible to say who moved first because it felt mutual and inevitable and right. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like the coffee they had shared after dinner. His hand came up to cup her face, his calloused thumb stroking her cheek, and she made a small sound of contentment that sent warmth flooding through his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Natalie rested her forehead against his chest. "What are we doing?" "I think we are courting," Zachary said, and she laughed, the sound lighter than anything he had heard from her before. "I think you are right." She pulled back enough to look up at him. "But Zachary, you need to understand something. I am not free to just fall in love and ride off into the sunset with you. I have responsibilities. My mother depends on me. This boarding house, as precarious as its future is all we have. Whatever happens between us, those things cannot change." "I would never ask you to abandon your responsibilities," he assured her. "Your loyalty to your mother is part of what I love about you. What happens when you go back to your mountains? Will you expect me to go with you?" "I do not know," he admitted. "I have not thought that far ahead. All I know is that I want to be with you, and we will figure out the rest together. If that means I spend more time in town and less time in the mountains, so be it. If it means finding a way to bring your mother somewhere she can get better care, we will do that. We will find solutions, Natalie." Together. She smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Together. I like the sound of that. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while the lamp flickered and cast dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the winter night was cold and dark. But inside, in that moment, everything felt warm and full of possibility. The next morning, Zachary woke with a sense of purpose stronger than anything he had felt in years. He loved Natalie, and she was beginning to love him back. But love alone would not solve her problems. They still needed to find a way to save the boarding house. After breakfast, he asked Natalie if he could see the original loan documents. She retrieved them from a small desk in the parlor, and they sat together studying the papers. "This is interesting," Zachary said, pointing to a clause buried in the middle of the contract. "It says here that improvements to the property can be counted toward the loan balance at fair market value. Did your father make any improvements?" "Yes," Natalie said, leaning over to read where he was pointing. "He replaced the roof and added 2 rooms upstairs before he died, but I do not see how that helps us. Because those improvements should have reduced the amount owed. Did Mrs. Patterson account for them when she bought the note from the bank?" Natalie frowned, flipping through the papers. "I do not think so. She claimed the full $300 was still owed. Then she may be in violation of the loan terms. If we can get an assessor to value those improvements and prove that Mrs. Patterson is claiming more than she is legally owed, we might be able to renegotiate or even invalidate part of the debt." Hope blazed in Natalie's eyes. "Do you really think that would work?" "I do not know," Zachary said honestly, "but it is worth trying. We need to find someone who can assess the value of the improvements impartially, not someone connected to the bank or to Mrs. Patterson." "Mr. Warren," Natalie said suddenly. "He is a builder who does work all over the county. He is honest, and he knew my father. He might be willing to help. Then let us go talk to him." Mr. Warren's workshop was on the outskirts of town, a large barn filled with lumber and tools and the smell of fresh-cut wood. He was a man in his 60s, lean and weathered, with hands scarred from decades of carpentry work. When Natalie explained their situation, his expression grew thoughtful. "I remember when your father put that new roof on," he said. "Fine work, too. Cedar shingles, proper flashing, built to last 20 years or more. And those rooms upstairs, he did not cut corners on those either. Good framing, proper windows, quality materials. Could you assess the value of those improvements? Zachary asked. We need an independent evaluation to present to Mrs. Patterson. Warren scratched his chin. I could, but Mrs. Patterson will not like it. She has considerable influence in this town, and she does not take kindly to people challenging her. I understand, Natalie said. But Mr. Warren, if we cannot reduce the amount we owe, we will lose everything. I am willing to face Mrs. Patterson's displeasure if it means saving my mother's home. Warren studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Your father was a good man, and he always treated me fair. I will do the assessment. Give me 2 days to examine the property and prepare a proper report. Thank you, Natalie said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. As they walked back toward town, Natalie slipped her hand into Zachary's. It felt natural, right, as if they had been holding hands for years instead of days. You think this will work? She asked. I think it is our best chance, Zachary said. But Natalie, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that it might not be enough. Even if we reduce the debt, there may still be an amount you cannot pay immediately. I know. She squeezed his hand. But at least we are trying. At least we are not just accepting defeat. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Warren spent hours at the boarding house, measuring and examining and making notes. Natalie cooked and cleaned and cared for her mother, but Zachary could see the hope building in her eyes, tempering the ever-present worry. He spent the time continuing his repairs and also exploring the town more thoroughly. San Bernardino was growing rapidly, with new businesses opening and new people arriving regularly. The railroad had reached the area a few years earlier, bringing increased commerce and opportunity. Zachary found himself wondering what it would be like to stay here permanently, to build a life in this town with Natalie, instead of retreating to his solitary existence in the mountains. The idea should have felt confining, but instead it felt liberating. He had hidden in the mountains for 5 years, using survival as an excuse to avoid living. Natalie made him want to live again, fully and completely, not just endure. On the 3rd day, Warren returned with his report. They gathered in the boarding house parlor, Natalie, Zachary, and the builder, while Margaret listened from her room upstairs with the door open. I have completed my assessment, Warren said, laying out several pages of detailed notes and sketches. The roof your father installed would have cost approximately $120 in materials and labor at the time it was done. The 2-room addition would have cost another $80. That is $200 worth of improvements that should have been credited against the loan balance under the terms of the original contract. So we only owe $100. Natalie's voice was barely a whisper. According to the original loan terms, yes, of course, Mrs. Patterson may dispute this, but I have documented everything thoroughly, and I am willing to testify to these values if necessary. Zachary felt a fierce satisfaction. $100 was still a significant sum, but it was manageable. Between his savings and what Natalie could raise, they could pay it off without losing the boarding house. Mr. Warren, I cannot thank you enough, Natalie said. No thanks needed. I am just ensuring the contract is honored as written. He stood and handed her the report. Take this to Mrs. Patterson. If she refuses to accept it, take it to a lawyer. You have a solid case. After Warren left, Natalie sat staring at the report as if she could not quite believe it was real. Zachary sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. We did it, he said quietly. Or at least we have a fighting chance. Because of you. She turned to look at him, her eyes shining. If you had not thought to check the loan documents, if you had not suggested getting an independent assessment, I would have lost everything without ever knowing I had a legal right to fight back. We are partners, remember. We figure things out together. She leaned against him, and they sat like that for a long while, taking comfort in each other's presence. Finally, Margaret's voice drifted down from upstairs. "Natalie, bring that man up here. I want to talk to him." Natalie looked at Zachary with a mixture of amusement and trepidation. "She only calls you that man when she is feeling particularly imperious." "I can handle imperious," Zachary said, standing and offering her his hand. Upstairs, Margaret was sitting up in bed, looking more alert than Zachary had seen her since his arrival. Her color was better, perhaps because of the hope that now filled the house like fresh air. "Mr. Sawyer," she said as they entered. "Sit down, both of you." They sat in the chairs beside her bed, and Margaret fixed Zachary with her sharp gaze. "I am not a fool," she said bluntly. "I see the way you look at my daughter. I see the way she looks at you. You are courting her." "Yes, madam," Zachary said, seeing no point in denying it. "And what are your intentions, mother?" Natalie protested, but Margaret held up a hand. "Hush, child, this is important." She turned back to Zachary. "Well, my intentions are honorable, Mrs. Vance. I love your daughter, and if she will have me, I intend to marry her and spend the rest of my life making her happy." The words hung in the air, bold and unequivocal. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and something else, something that looked like joy. Margaret nodded slowly. "Good. That is what I wanted to hear. But Mr. Sawyer, you should know that Natalie comes with responsibilities. I am old and sick, and I will not live forever, but while I do live, I need care. If you marry my daughter, you take on that burden as well." "It would not be a burden," Zachary said firmly. "It would be a privilege to care for you, Mrs. Vance. You raised an extraordinary woman, and you deserve to be treated with respect and love for whatever time God grants you." Margaret's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "You are a good man, Zachary Sawyer. Better than I thought when I first saw you in your buckskins and beard. You have my blessing to court my daughter properly." "Thank you, Mrs. Vance. Now leave us. I want to talk to Natalie alone." Zachary stood and kissed Margaret's hand gently before leaving the room. As he closed the door behind him, he heard Margaret's voice, softer now. "You love him, child." "Yes, mother, I think I do." "Then hold on to him. Good men are rare, and men who look at you the way he does are rarer still." Zachary smiled and headed downstairs, feeling lighter than he had in years. He was in love, truly in love for the first time since Sarah's death. And unlike before, when youth and circumstance had shaped his choices, this time he was choosing with full knowledge of how precious and fragile love could be. The next morning, armed with Warren's report, Zachary and Natalie went to confront Mrs. Patterson. She lived in the finest house in San Bernardino, a 2-story Victorian painted in cheerful yellow with white trim. A housekeeper answered the door and led them to a sitting room furnished with expensive furniture that contrasted sharply with the boarding house's worn simplicity. Mrs. Patterson swept in a few minutes later. She was a woman in her 50s, dressed in the latest fashion, her gray hair perfectly coiffed. Her eyes were cold and calculating as they assessed her visitors. "Miss Vance, and this must be your mountain man." Her tone made it clear what she thought of Zachary. "Mr. Sawyer is a business associate," Natalie said crisply. "We are here to discuss the loan." "There is nothing to discuss. You have until the end of the month to pay the full amount or I claim the property. Those were the terms." "Actually, there is something to discuss." Natalie handed her Warren's report. "My father made substantial improvements to the property before he died. Under the terms of the original loan, those improvements should have been credited against the balance. You have been claiming $300 when the actual amount owed is only $100. Mrs. Patterson barely glanced at the report before tossing it aside. "This is nonsense. The bank sold me the note for $300. That is what you owe." The bank had no right to sell you a note for more than was legally owed, Zachary said, his voice calm but firm. If you insist on claiming the full amount, we will take this matter to court. Mr. Warren has documented everything thoroughly, and I am confident a judge will rule in our favor. Mrs. Patterson's eyes narrowed. You would take me to court? Do you have any idea who I am? I have connections, influence. I could make your life very difficult, Miss Vance. You could try, Natalie said, and Zachary felt pride surge through him at the steel in her voice. But I have documentation, an expert witness, and the original loan contract. I also have the truth on my side. So yes, Mrs. Patterson, I will take you to court if necessary. But I am giving you the opportunity to settle this fairly and privately. $100, paid within 30 days. That is what the contract says I owe, and that is what I am willing to pay. The two women stared at each other, and Zachary could see Mrs. Patterson calculating her options. Finally, she picked up Warren's report and actually read it this time. Her lips pressed into a thin line. $125, she countered, to account for interest and fees. 110, Natalie said without hesitation, and that is my final offer. Mrs. Patterson glared at her, but Zachary could see she was going to accept. The woman was shrewd enough to recognize when she had been outmaneuvered. Fine. $110, paid within 30 days. If you default, I claim everything. Agreed, agreed. They shook hands and Zachary and Natalie left the house. Once they were outside, Natalie grabbed Zachary's arm, her whole body trembling. We did it, she breathed. We actually did it. You did it, Zachary corrected. You stood up to her. You negotiated. I just stood there and looked intimidating. She laughed, the sound bright and free. You do that very well. The intimidating part. Years of practice keeping wolves and bears away from my traps. They walked back toward the boarding house, and Zachary found himself thinking about the future. They had solved the immediate crisis of the loan, but there was still the question of long-term stability. The boarding house needed more guests to be profitable. Margaret needed ongoing medical care. And Zachary needed to figure out how to reconcile his life in the mountains with his growing desire to build a life here with Natalie. That evening, after dinner, he asked Natalie to take a walk with him. The night was cold but clear, stars brilliant overhead. They walked to the small church where this had all begun, and Zachary led her inside. The chapel was dark except for the moonlight streaming through the windows. They sat together in the pew where he had waited that first night, listening to her pray. I have been thinking, Zachary said, taking her hand, about the future, about us. And what have you concluded? That I do not want to go back to the mountains alone. That 5 years of solitude was enough. I want to build a life here with you, Natalie. A real life, not just surviving but thriving. But your work, your trapping, can be done differently. I have money saved and there are other ways to make a living. I could work as a guide for people who want to explore the mountains. I could provide meat to the town butcher. I could even help you expand the boarding house into something bigger and better. The point is, I have skills and I am willing to use them in new ways. Ways that let me stay here with you. Natalie was quiet for a long moment. Are you sure? I do not want you to give up your life for me. I am not giving anything up. I am choosing something better. I am choosing you, choosing us, choosing a future that includes love and partnership and maybe, eventually, a family of our own. Her breath hitched. A family, if you want that. I know it is early to talk about such things, but I want you to know that I see a whole life with you, Natalie. Not just solving your current problems and then disappearing. I want to marry you, grow old with you, build something lasting together. She turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. Zachary Sawyer, are you asking me to marry you? Not yet, he said with a slight smile. We have only known each other 2 weeks. I am asking if you would be willing to consider it. If you could see yourself married to a reformed mountain man who loves you more than anything." "Yes," she whispered. "I could see it. I can see it so clearly it scares me." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I have been alone and responsible for so long. Because I have had to be strong and independent and never rely on anyone. Letting myself lean on you, trust you, love you completely, that is terrifying." Zachary reached up and cupped her face in his hands. "I know. Loving again terrifies me too. But Natalie, I would rather be terrified with you than safe and alone without you. I would rather risk my heart and have it broken than never feel this way again." She leaned forward and kissed him, and this time the kiss was deeper, more intense, full of promise and hope and the beginning of forever. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," she said. "I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other, but I love you, Zachary. I love you too. And it is not too soon. Sometimes the heart knows faster than the mind." They sat together in the moonlit chapel, holding each other, and Zachary thought about how strange life was. 2 weeks ago, he had been alone in the mountains, believing he would live out his days in solitary wilderness. Now he was here, holding a woman he loved, planning a future he had never expected to have. God worked in mysterious ways, his mother used to say. And sitting here in this chapel with Natalie in his arms, Zachary believed it. The next month passed quickly. Zachary continued his work on the boarding house, fixing everything that needed attention and beginning some improvements of his own. He built a new front gate, repaired the chimney, and reinforced the stairs. Each improvement made the house look more welcoming, more well-maintained, and slowly, guests began to return. First, a traveling salesman who needed a place to stay for a week. Then a family passing through on their way to Los Angeles. Then a teacher who had come to San Bernardino to interview for a position at the new school and needed lodging while she looked for permanent housing. With the increased income, Natalie was able to save money toward the loan payment. Zachary contributed too, though he did it carefully, making sure it looked like payment for his own room and board rather than charity. Together, they accumulated the $110 needed. On the last day of the month, they went together to Mrs. Patterson's house and paid the debt in full. The woman counted the money with obvious reluctance, then produced the loan papers and marked them as paid. "You have satisfied the debt," she said coldly. "The boarding house is yours, Miss Vance." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson." Outside, Natalie practically danced with joy. "It is over. The debt is paid. We can keep the house." Zachary caught her in his arms and spun her around, her laughter ringing out in the afternoon air. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly, not caring that they were in public. "You did it," he said. "You saved your home." "We did it," she corrected. "I could not have done this without you." That evening, they celebrated with a special dinner. Margaret even joined them at the table, making her way slowly down the stairs with Zachary's assistance. Her breathing was still labored, but her eyes were bright with happiness. "To new beginnings," Margaret said, raising her glass of water. "To new beginnings," they echoed. After dinner, while Natalie helped her mother back upstairs, Zachary stepped outside onto the porch. The night was cool and clear, and he could see lights twinkling across the town. San Bernardino was not the wilderness he was accustomed to, but he found he did not miss the mountains as much as he expected. Or rather, he missed them but not enough to leave. Natalie joined him on the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. She leaned against the railing beside him and he put his arm around her. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how much my life has changed in 1 month, about how happy I am, about how I want to make this permanent." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "What do you mean?" Zachary took a deep breath. He had been planning this moment for days, waiting for the right time. Now, with the debt paid and the future opening before them like an unwritten book, felt perfect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small sapphire stone. He had bought it a week ago from the jeweler on Main Street, spending a significant portion of his savings. "Natalie Vance," he said, dropping to one knee on the porch they had repaired together. "I know we have only known each other a month. I know some people would say we are rushing. But I have lived long enough to know that love does not follow a schedule. I love you with everything in me, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you every single day. Will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and she pulled him to his feet to kiss him. The kiss was deep and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much. I love you too. Forever." They were married 6 weeks later in the same chapel where Zachary had first heard Natalie pray. It was a small ceremony, with Margaret in attendance despite her weakness, and a handful of friends from town. Warren the builder was there, and Dr. Morrison, and even the minister who had known Natalie since she first arrived in San Bernardino. Natalie wore a simple white dress that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her smaller frame. Zachary wore new clothes, proper town clothes that felt strange after so many years in buckskins, but he wore them willingly for her. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed his bride with a tenderness that made several people in attendance wipe their eyes. This was more than a wedding, it was a redemption. A second chance at love and life for both of them. The reception was held at the boarding house, now full of guests who had come for the wedding. Natalie had cooked for days, preparing a feast that rivaled anything the town's finest restaurant could have produced. There was music and dancing and joy, so much joy that it seemed to fill every corner of the house. Late in the evening, as the guests were beginning to leave, Margaret called Zachary over to where she sat in a comfortable chair they had carried down from her room. "Come here, son," she said, and his heart warmed at the word. "Sit with me a moment." He sat, taking her frail hand in his. "I want to thank you," she said. "Not just for saving our house or for loving my daughter, though those things are significant. I want to thank you for giving me hope, for showing me that God still answers prayers, even desperate ones whispered in empty chapels." "Mrs. Vance, Margaret," she corrected with a smile. "You are my son now, call me Margaret." "Margaret," he amended. "I am the one who should thank you. You raised an extraordinary woman, and she has given me a reason to live fully again. I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of her." "You already are, Zachary, you already are." She patted his hand. "Now go. Your bride is waiting, and you two have a whole life ahead of you." He kissed her cheek and went to find Natalie. She was in the kitchen, beginning to clean up, and he stopped her gently. "Leave it," he said. "Tonight is for celebrating, not for working. But the mess will still be here tomorrow." He pulled her close. "Come upstairs with me, Mrs. Sawyer." She smiled at the name. "I like how that sounds. So do I." They climbed the stairs together to what was now their shared room. Zachary had moved his few belongings in earlier that day, combining his simple possessions with hers. It was not much, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Their wedding night was tender and full of love, two people who had both known loss finding healing in each other's arms. Afterward, they lay together in the moonlight, Natalie's head on Zachary's broad chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," she said. "Are you?" "Yes, though I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream." If it is, then we are dreaming together." She tilted her head to look up at him. "Thank you for finding me that night, for waiting while I prayed, for hearing me when I needed it most." "Thank you for letting me stay," he replied, "for trusting me despite having every reason not to, for loving me even though I come with more than my share of rough edges. I like your rough edges. They make you real." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the certainty that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. The first year of their marriage was full of hard work and joy in equal measure. The boarding house thrived under their joint management. Zachary's repairs and improvements made it one of the most well-maintained properties in San Bernardino, and Natalie's cooking and warm hospitality kept guests coming back and recommending it to others. Margaret's health remained stable, neither improving nor declining significantly. The regular medicine and her daughter's attentive care kept her comfortable, and she found joy in watching the boarding house bustle with life again. Zachary adapted to town life better than he expected. He still made trips into the mountains, but now they were measured in days rather than months, and he always returned with meat and furs to sell. He began guiding wealthy tourists who wanted to experience the wilderness safely, and that brought in additional income while satisfying his need for the open spaces. But his favorite time was always coming home to Natalie, opening the door and seeing her smile, eating dinner together while she told him about the guests and the day's small dramas, lying in bed at night with her in his arms, listening to her breathing, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. Near the end of their first year of marriage, Natalie told him she was expecting a baby. The news filled Zachary with a complex mixture of joy and terror. He had lost a wife and child once before, and the memory of that loss haunted him. Natalie saw the fear in his eyes and took his hands. "I am scared too," she admitted. "But Zachary, we cannot live our lives afraid of what might happen. We have to trust that God brought us together for a reason, and that includes this baby." "I cannot lose you," he said, his voice rough. "If something happened to you, I would not survive it. Nothing is going to happen to me. Doctor Morrison says I am strong and healthy, and I have you to take care of me. I am not facing this alone like your Sarah did." The mention of his first wife's name did not hurt the way it once would have. Time and Natalie's love had healed that wound, leaving only tender memory instead of raw grief. "You are right," he said, pulling her close. "We face this together, like everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Natalie continued running the boarding house with Zachary taking over more of the physical tasks as she grew larger. Margaret was delighted at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, and her excitement seemed to give her renewed strength. On a warm evening in September 1879, Natalie went into labor. Dr. Morrison came quickly, and Zachary paced the floor downstairs while the women worked upstairs. It was the longest night of his life, every cry from Natalie sending fear through his heart. But when dawn broke, he heard the sound he had been desperately hoping for, a baby's strong, healthy cry. Dr. Morrison came downstairs, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Sawyer, a big, healthy boy. And your wife is doing fine, tired but fine. You can go up now." Zachary took the stairs 3 at a time. In their bedroom, Natalie lay propped up against pillows, holding a bundle of blankets. Her face was pale and exhausted, but her smile was radiant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Zachary approached slowly, almost reverently. When he looked down at the baby in Natalie's arms, he felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost painful. The baby had dark hair and a red, wrinkled face, and he was absolutely perfect. "Can I hold him?" Zachary asked, his voice barely a whisper. Natalie carefully transferred the baby to his father's arms. Zachary cradled his son with surprising gentleness for a man with such large, rough hands. The baby opened his eyes, dark blue and unfocused, and Zachary felt tears stream down his face. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I am your father, and I promise to protect you and love you for all of my days." "What should we name him?" Natalie asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. Now, holding his son, Zachary knew exactly what felt right. "William," he said, "after my father. William Sawyer." "William," Natalie repeated, testing the name. "I like it. William Zachary Sawyer." Over the next weeks they adjusted to life with a baby. William was a good child, healthy and strong like his father. Zachary proved to be a surprisingly adept parent, changing diapers and walking the floor with William when he cried at night without complaint. He would sing old mountain songs in his deep voice, and the baby would quiet and stare up at him with wide eyes. Margaret doted on her grandson, spending hours in the rocking chair holding him and telling him stories, even though he was too young to understand. Her health had declined somewhat after the excitement of the birth, but she seemed determined to hold on long enough to see William reach his first birthday. The boarding house continued to prosper. They had a waiting list of people wanting rooms, and Zachary began planning an expansion, adding 4 more bedrooms on the 3rd floor. The business that had once been on the verge of collapse was now thriving, providing security for their growing family. On their 2nd wedding anniversary, Zachary and Natalie stood together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. William was asleep inside, and Margaret was resting comfortably. For a moment, everything was peaceful and perfect. "You ever miss it?" Natalie asked. "The solitary life in the mountains." Zachary considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, the quiet, the self-sufficiency, but I would not trade what I have now for anything. This life with you and William, this is everything I never knew I needed." "I am glad you came to that chapel," she said softly. "I am glad you stayed, so am I, though I think it was more than chance that brought me there. I think it was answered prayer." She leaned against him, and they watched the sun sink below the horizon together. Inside, William began to cry, and Natalie moved to go to him, but Zachary stopped her. "Let me. You rest." He went inside and picked up his son, cradling him against his broad chest. William's cries subsided immediately, and Zachary walked slowly through the house, patting the baby's back and humming tunelessly. This, he thought, this was what life was meant to be. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just existing, but living fully. Not just avoiding pain, but embracing joy even with the risk that came with it. He thought about that night in the chapel, about hearing Natalie's desperate prayer and feeling compelled to wait, to listen, to help. He thought about every choice and chance that had led them to this moment. And he was grateful, deeply and profoundly grateful for all of it. William fell asleep in his arms, his tiny hand clutching Zachary's shirt. Zachary stood in the lamplight of the boarding house, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, and he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 months later, on a cold November night. They found her in the morning, looking as if she had simply drifted off, a slight smile on her face. Natalie grieved deeply, but she took comfort in knowing her mother had lived to see her happily married with a grandchild, had lived to see the boarding house saved and thriving. They buried Margaret in the San Bernardino Cemetery on a hill overlooking the town. The minister spoke of her strength and her faith, of how she had raised a remarkable daughter despite tremendous hardship. As they lowered her coffin into the ground, Zachary held Natalie close while she cried, and he held William in his other arm, the baby quiet and solemn as if he understood the significance of the moment. She was ready, Natalie said later that night as they lay in bed. She told me a few days ago that she had made her peace, that she was grateful for the time she had been given to see us happy. She was a remarkable woman, Zachary said, and she lives on in you and in William. Natalie was quiet for a long moment. I am pregnant again. Zachary's breath caught. Are you sure? Yes. I have been certain for a few weeks, but with Mother being so ill, I did not want to add to everything else. But yes, we are going to have another baby. He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Another blessing. Your mother would have been so happy. I think she knew. She said something a few days ago about watching over her grandchildren, plural. At the time I thought she was just confused, but now I wonder if she somehow sensed it. They lay together in the darkness, mourning Margaret, but also celebrating the new life growing inside Natalie. It was the nature of life, Zachary thought. Joy and sorrow intertwined, endings and beginnings overlapping. The key was to hold onto the joy without letting the sorrow consume you, to honor the past while still embracing the future. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Elizabeth after both their mothers, was born in July 1881. She had Natalie's brown hair and Zachary's strong features, and from birth she was fierce and determined. Where William was placid and easygoing, Margaret, they called her Maggie, was demanding and spirited. She is going to be a handful, Natalie said one night, exhausted after hours of trying to settle the crying baby. She is going to be magnificent, Zachary corrected, taking his daughter and walking her around the room. Strong and independent and unstoppable. Just like her mother and her namesake. And he was right. As Maggie grew, she proved to be bold and fearless, climbing things she should not climb, exploring every corner of the boarding house, keeping her parents and older brother constantly alert. But she was also loving and funny, and her laughter filled the house with joy. The boarding house continued to thrive. The expansion Zachary had built proved necessary as they frequently ran at full capacity. They hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the cooking and cleaning, and she became almost like family, devoted to the Sawyers and their children. Zachary had long since stopped making extended trips to the mountains. His guiding business was successful enough that he did not need to trap anymore, and he much preferred spending his time with his family. He still loved the wilderness, still took William and later Maggie on camping trips to teach them the skills he had learned. But the mountains were no longer his refuge. Home was his refuge now, and home was wherever Natalie was. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Zachary took Natalie back to the chapel where they had first met. It was evening, just like that first night, and the setting sun cast golden light through the windows. They sat in the same pew where he had waited while she prayed, and he took her hand. 5 years, he said. 5 years since I walked through that door and heard you pouring your heart out to God. 5 years since you sat quietly and waited for me to finish, she added. I have never asked you, what were you thinking during that time, while you sat there listening? Zachary was quiet for a moment, remembering. I was thinking that I recognized the sound of someone who had reached the end of their rope. I was thinking that I knew what it felt like to be that desperate and alone. And I was thinking that maybe, just maybe, God had led me here for a reason. And had he? Yes. He led me to you. He gave me a second chance at love and life and happiness. He took a broken, grieving man and made him whole again through you. Natalie leaned her head on his shoulder. You did the same for me. I was drowning and you threw me a lifeline. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself. You stood beside me and helped me fight for what was mine. We saved each other, Zachary said simply. That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves, from our fears, from the loneliness that can destroy a person more thoroughly than any physical hardship. They sat together in the peaceful chapel as the light faded, thinking about all they had been through together, the struggles and the triumphs, the losses and the gains, the fear and the faith, and they were grateful, both of them, for every moment. As they left the chapel and walked home through the summer evening, Zachary thought about the path his life had taken. From the mountains to this town, from solitary trapper to husband and father, from a man running from grief to a man embracing joy. It had started with a prayer, desperately whispered in an empty chapel. And it had been answered in ways neither of them could have imagined, not with money or miracles, but with connection and love and the courage to build something new from the ruins of the old. The boarding house glowed with light as they approached, welcoming them home. Through the windows, they could see Sarah moving around the kitchen, and they could hear the children's voices, William reading to Maggie from one of his books. This was their life now, full and rich and brimming with love. Not perfect, there would always be challenges and struggles, but good. So very good. Zachary held the door open for Natalie, and as she passed him, she paused to kiss his cheek. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, forever." They walked inside together, closing the door on the darkening evening, stepping into the warm light of home. And if Zachary had learned anything from his years in the wilderness and his years with Natalie, it was that this warmth, this love, this family, was worth more than all the gold and furs and solitary peace the mountains could offer. He had found his true home not in the high country, but in the heart of a woman who had been brave enough to pray and patient enough to let him find his way to her. And he would spend the rest of his days being grateful for that gift and proving himself worthy of it. The years continued to unfold in their gentle rhythm. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Maggie remained spirited and adventurous, always getting into mischief, but charming her way out of trouble with her infectious smile. In 1884, another son joined the family, Thomas, named after Natalie's father. He was quieter than his siblings, content to observe the world with calm, steady eyes that reminded Zachary of the mountains he still loved. The boarding house was now one of the most respected establishments in San Bernardino. People came from all over California to stay there, drawn by its reputation for cleanliness, excellent food, and warm hospitality. Zachary and Natalie had achieved something remarkable. They had built not just a business but a true home that welcomed strangers and made them feel like family. Zachary himself had become a respected figure in the town. People sought his advice on everything from building repairs to surviving in the wilderness. He served on the town council for a time and helped establish new businesses. The rough mountain man who had ridden into San Bernardino 6 years ago was now a pillar of the community, though he still wore his hair long and kept his beard, a reminder of where he had come from. But his greatest pride was always his family. Watching William learn to ride a horse with the same careful attention Zachary had learned to track animals. Seeing Maggie stand up to boys twice her size with her mother's fierce independence. Holding baby Thomas and marveling at the trust in those small hands clutching his finger. And Natalie, his beautiful, strong, remarkable Natalie, who had given him all of this. Who had taken a risk on a stranger and built a life beyond anything either of them had dreamed possible. On a spring evening in 1885, as they sat together on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Natalie turned to him with a question. "You ever regret it, giving up your life in the mountains?" Zachary looked at William showing Thomas how to catch fireflies while Maggie danced around them singing. He looked at the boarding house behind them, solid and prosperous. He looked at Natalie beside him, still as lovely as the day he first saw her in the chapel. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. The mountains gave me survival. You gave me life." She smiled and took his hand, and they sat together in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the evidence of the extraordinary life they had built together, one prayer, one act of patience, one moment of faith at a time.